Hi, I'm Natalie Rhodes, and this is Into Math's 5th grade, Module 11, Lesson 3. Let's start off by going over the I can objective. It says, I can create a story context for a given equation and use a visual fraction model to represent the quotient. The learning objective is to write a word problem for a given equation and use a visual fraction model to represent the quotient. The prior learning is that students compared fractions with different numerators and denominators. Students multiplied fractions by whole numbers using visual models and equations, and students solved word problems involving multiplication of a fraction by a whole number. All right, so if we move into Lesson 3 on page 275, we have a Step It Up. Problem number 1, this is what problem can be solved by finding the number of 1/4 size parts in 4 wholes. So with this, you have a lot of freedom, right? We are creating a word problem to work with the equation they give us. You know me, I like food. I especially like bread. So what I decided to do is I decided to make my problem about bread. That'll make me real interested in some of this math. So for my 4 wholes, I decided to make that 4 loaves of bread. So for A, it says, what can be the 4 wholes? I decided to make it 4 loaves of bread. All right, and then what can be the 1/4 size parts in the whole? I was just thinking make it simple, right? If I have 4 loaves, I'm just going to cut it into 4 pieces, right? So in 1 loaf, I'm going to have 4 smaller sections per loaf. So this would be cut pieces of each loaf. And then for C, it says write a problem that can be solved by finding the number of 1/4 size parts in 4 wholes. Now, I'm assuming they want this word problem to be pretty short because we only have 2 lines. So I wanted to make it as simple as possible. So I put, if I cut 4 loaves into 1/4 pieces, how many pieces will I have? I'm running out of room, so I'm just going to say how many pieces. All right, then for D, it says use a visual fraction model to represent the problem. So remember for our dividend, that's our total that we started out, we had 4 loaves, or whatever you decided to do. I'm just going to write 4 wholes, and I always like to use rectangles. It just makes more sense to my brain. If you want to use circles, please feel free to use circles. So what I did is I made my 4 loaves of bread. There are my 4 loaves of bread, and then I'm just going to cut them into 4 pieces. So if I cut this loaf in half, and then I cut that half in half, I would have 4 pieces per loaf. All right, and then for E, it says, what is the quotient and what does it represent in the context of your problem? I'm going to pause there. So what is the quotient? That means what is the answer? How many total pieces of bread do I have? If I have 4 in 4 loaves, that means I have 16 pieces. So what is your quotient? 16. I answer that question. Then you can put a semicolon or a comma. What does it represent in the context of your problem? In my problem, it represents the pieces of bread. I want to make sure I answer every single problem. Then I have another question that says, what equation can you write to model your problem? So put a comma. The equation that we were starting out with would be 4 as my dividend, and I divided my 4 loaves into 4th pieces, and that was equal to 16 total pieces. All right, let's go ahead to the next page. On page 276, another Step It Out, number 2, it says write a word problem that can be modeled by T equals 5 divided by 1/3. Then solve the problem using a visual fraction model. So remember, you can use whatever you want for this. As long as you get the dividend, the divisor, and the quotient, and you're able to draw a visual model, that is all great. You just want to make sure that you're using 5 wholes and you're dividing it into third pieces. All right, so for A, you're writing any word problem you want. B, draw that visual model. And then E, what is the quotient? So tell me the answer. And then what does it represent in the context of your problem? All right, go ahead and do these 3, and then we'll come back and do it together. Go ahead and hit pause here. All right, great work. Let's go ahead and go over this. So for my word problem, I decided to come away from food, but not so far away. I said if there are 5 lunch benches and each person takes up a third of the bench, how many people can be seated? I thought that might be a kind of a real world problem that we could be dealing with. So I'll write out as much as I can for the word problem, just so you can see the wording and how I did it. So if there are 5 lunch benches and each person takes up 1/3 of the bench, how many people can be seated? And I'm running out of room, so I'm just going to say how many people. All right, so now we want to use a visual model to solve. And they are benches, so I decided to go rectangles for this specific problem. So I'm going to draw 5 rectangles to represent my benches. Then I need to divide them into thirds. So your visual model should be pretty much the same as mine because we all started with 5 and we're all dividing them into thirds. If yours are circles, that's great too. So each bench is going to be marked into thirds because one person takes up a third of the bench. So these, I'm kind of making seats on the bench, right? How many people can we sit down? All right, and then what is the quotient? So remember, I had 5 divided by 1/3. So we know that if I have 3 on each of the 5 benches, that's going to be 15. I want to show you how to do that flip and multiply that I mentioned in the last lesson. So with my 1/3, my rule for dividing fractions is always flip the second number and multiply. Flip the second and multiply. So my second number is 1/3, so I'm just going to flip it over. So I'm going to have 5 over 1. And then that 1/3 is going to become 3 over 1. So flip and multiply. And then I can multiply straight across. 5 times 3 is 15. 1 over 1 is 1, which equals our 15. And what does that quotient represent? It represents that 15 people can sit or 15 seats in my problem. All right, that's it for this video. Go ahead and solve the rest of your problems in this lesson, and I'll see you back here for Module 11, Lesson 4.